I'm Travis Plunk. I work for Microsoft, but as a disclaimer, all my views are my own. I just was asked to talk about, well, I interpret it as TAMS in my career. So I put together just, these slides are more just for my reference about what I want to talk about, the high level overview. In TAMS, I did the coursework and I had a stipend, and most of my stipend work was in computational research. My my first task, well, the first task was actually setting up chemistry lab until they figured out I was taking the course, and then they changed me over to the computational research. Um, and it was really just rewriting some. They were running the stuff on a PC at the time, and they wanted me to move it over to their bigger computer they had. And it had SAS on it, so I had to rewrite some custom software they had over into SAS, which it it wasn't really that difficult, other than I really hadn't taken the mathematics needed, so I needed to go and get a math advisor and figure out the problem, solve solve the problem in the way SAS expected it to be solved, which was a little different than it was solved in the custom research, the custom tool. And I set up a batch. They dropped the data in a folder. A batch would launch off the SAS tool, give them the results. It was about an order of magnitude faster. And that research advisor expected me to take that basically 2 years to do that. I got that done in a term, and I was assigned a new advisor to do more research. And then I was given a real research problem. And I worked the rest of my time. I didn't quite finish that, but I got the basic simulation for the new research problem done while I was gone, and it was handed over to another TAMS person before I left. Um, I I had some health and financial issues, and I started working after TAMS. Um, if you have questions about that, I'm happy to go into how that affected things. But I got a support job at Dell. I quickly advanced there and ended up in e-commerce operations as a developer. Um, I I don't really want to say specific bad things about Dell, but it was a pretty good company. But I had some problems where they were working me pretty hard because they thought they could force me to, because I didn't have a degree. And I started looking for another job and ended up working at ended up interviewing at several different places. I kind of skipped a couple of things. The I think one of the reasons why I did well is because compared to the other people, like I had a real like process of elimination, and like a real process to sit down and solve problems. When I found people would skip around, and they problems in the real world um, often fool you. I found often when people are applying the process of elimination, they eliminate the improbable things in their head, and then they've eliminated everything else that's probable, and and now they're like, there's nothing left that it can be. But if you've eliminated the improbable, but without actually testing them, then one of those improbable things is possible. And you've got to go and start adding the improbable things back to your set of tests one at a time. I think, like, thinking about these things systematically, I'm not just talking about that, but helped me a lot there in my career. And I think not just my research, but some of the courses that I took at TAMS taught me a lot. Any questions before we move on? My first job at Microsoft was in quick fix engineering. So my job literally was to quickly fix things when they went wrong. I spend most of my time at Microsoft fixing things there, but I'd be sent to customer sites, and usually I was sent there for 48 hours. My job was to fix a customer issue within 48 hours. Sometimes we knew the problem wasn't at the customer site, and my job really was just to placate the customer. But that was rare. Microsoft didn't want to spend that money if we didn't have to. Slowly, Microsoft changed that so that the software engineers weren't involved in that, and I moved into a software design engineer and test role. Where was I when that happened? I was working on a component that eventually became part of SharePoint. I didn't work on that for very long. In there, I was responsible for patching our test infrastructure. And I ended up working on moving over to Windows Update. And in Windows Update, my job involved writing software to test our system like customers would really run it. We ran a bank of 25,000 computers these were real users or real computers in Microsoft. And we were running the tests on those machines. And really my job was to make these tests like no one would know these tests were running if that didn't happen, I had failed. But this gave us important data about how like Windows Update would function in the real world as we wrote new versions of it. I worked there for 7 years. It was interesting and taught me a lot, but this was the time before Satya took over. And I was still a software test engineer. The cultural shift that's happened at Microsoft has been huge. And as we started making the shift to that, I got recognized quite a bit more. Like I was given more recognition for teaching other people. And I've been promoted quite a bit. After Windows Update, I moved on to a part of PowerShell that is, what's the term? I can't think of it right now. It's PowerShell desired state configuration, which is a declarative language rather than imperative language. If you're not familiar with the two, almost every language is imperative. It's like a recipe. It tells you like all the instructions on how to get things done. A declarative language doesn't give you the instructions on how it's done. Instead of saying, I want to bake a carrot cake and here's all the ingredients, you put it in a 12-inch pan, you mix all the things and you bake it. A declarative language says, I want a 12-inch carrot cake. And probably underneath there's a recipe to make it, but it has a lot of parameters on how to vary it, and it knows how to do all the variations. In the course of working on that, we started, we call those recipes resources. We started open sourcing the resources, and I worked on that project. sometime in, I think, 2015, we started open sourcing PowerShell. And I was not on the core PowerShell team. I was still on this declarative engine. And they had a deadline or a date they needed to make for the open sourcing because of some business reasons. And I was asked to come help because they were running behind. I worked on that, and I really liked that team. And open sourcing the whole project made things even more open than just open sourcing the recipes. Open sourcing like the resources was just like trying to offload a little bit of the work. Open sourcing the whole product meant like all the planning becomes visible, or most of the planning becomes visible. And that makes the software development a lot more honest. And I really enjoyed that work. I was invited to stay on the team, and I've been working there ever since. I work on some security aspects. Working on Windows Update, I had a lot of bit of um, knowledge about certificates and how to use them correctly to deliver things. And so that gave me a good bit of knowledge. And I also work on our build infrastructure quite a bit that puts together and delivers PowerShell. I also work on our Mac and Linux packaging and make sure we deliver that. And more recently, I wrote a book about PowerShell, it's more like a rewrite of a book. I did that with two other authors. Uh, um, the book was originally written for Windows PowerShell. When we open sourced, we made the book for, we made PowerShell for Linux, Mac, and Windows. So the book, the publisher wanted the book like revamped for what the current PowerShell is used for. So that's what we've done. I like the current PowerShell, the current Microsoft quite a bit more than I did. Solving security problems is a very interesting space. It's very contradictory to what I said I like about PowerShell, but it's something that I have unique knowledge about on the PowerShell team. So I do that, and I enjoy it. Questions?
So could you just give like a quick rundown on what PowerShell is and
PowerShell is a shell language. The It returns objects instead of it. It was based on something called the Monad Manifesto, which is why it returns objects. When you're running it as a shell, the objects have formatters with them. So like each object has a type. And if there's a formatter associated with the type, then the type gets formatted to that type, that type's formatter. So when you get a process back, the process is formatted to formatter for the process so that you get a good view of that. I can give an example. I can bring up a terminal on my side. So if I run git process, like it's going to format it nicely, but I can actually tell it to show me the whole object. And like, that's kind of useless. I mean, it's some of these properties are good for programming against, like, and there's actually other things on this object. There are methods, so I can actually go and save this object and just close my PowerShell apparent, or I have multiple PowerShells running. I think this is a bug on, oh yeah, I have to call kill, not close. Yeah, this is a bug on .NET. The, oh, so like I can kill the object, but I can kill the process by calling the method. The objects are live objects. The language is, yeah, I don't know what else to say about the language. Let me go back to the, so, well, that's not what I meant to do. My contact information is there. Well, GitHub's more just like, if you want to go see what I work on, you can go look at my GitHub. Since I'm open source, almost everything I work on is there and open. What I'm working on now is actually updating the open source version of PowerShell through Windows Update. And again, that's based on my experience. They assigned me the task because I have experience with Windows Update. And so I'm trying to integrate it back. The PowerShell also has pipelines like Python does. Python. So it's capable of processing data if you write the commandlets. The commandlets are the core things and that are PowerShell native. If you write them correctly so that they can process in a pipeline, so they can process one piece of data at a time. PowerShell can process data quite fast. Unfortunately, we're single threaded, so that's one of our limitations. But we're working on that. We have one thing where we can actually go and run multiple threads in a process now, but it's limited. Some of these things we inherited from the beginning of the language. More questions?
We have a few questions from the chat. First one is, how do you use PowerShell in managing Microsoft Windows programs and updates?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch a question there. Let me see if I can.
Maybe with the pull-up chat, it should be on like your bar on the top where you see your mute and video. Yeah.
Yeah, that's mainly in Windows PowerShell. There are some things to do that. Let me open a new browser window. Of course, where is my... I can increase the size here so people can see. So window managing updates, there's actually something that I wrote. I wrote the majority of it. I don't work on this anymore. This is back from, this is one of the things that I call a recipe, a resource. It has something in it called X Windows Update Agent, and this is what I'd recommend you use to manage updates. Unfortunately, if you go through this, the everything ends up being a call into COM, and it's kind of like a query language. So you can see this. I don't want to go into great depth into this, but you have to do a search, download, and then install. And this has ported everything into PowerShell functions so that you can do this, but it's meant to work in that declarative language. So this defines the declarative language, and oh God, this is incredibly hard to read. I'll go back out to the README. The how this is written is you declare a category, and this one's limited. So it's like you can install security, important, or optional updates. The API underneath is capable of more, but and you can tell it to install now, update now is what it's called. The and This is just a limitation of this language. Like there has to be a key, and this thing is the equivalent of a static. And so to have a key, we just have something, we just made up something. To manage programs, it varies quite a bit. So there's this Windows optional feature. So you can get a Windows optional feature, and then there's another commandlet, which is enable Windows optional feature to go and enable it. This works on client and server. Server has another one which is higher level, and it works for server components. I don't really want to go into that. But do they have like these examples are unfortunately fake. Like my feature doesn't exist. So Telnet is one that I can think of off the or I think it's Telnet client. Here looks like a real one. And of course, it's so tiny we can't read it. But let me see if I can. So here they're installing the Windows subsystem for Linux. So because this is a generic feature, it works against images as well as your current operating system. So you have to tell it which one. So you say -online to say the current, your current machine.
Hey,
And
sorry
you
to
tell the
interrupt, but
feed.
I think you might be sharing the only the edge screen and not your full screen. So I don't think we are looking at what you're looking at right now.
Um,
Is that right? Or
Let me. I told it to share, but can you see my edge now?
it's loading for me at least. Yeah, I think it's just a black screen right now.
I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, wait, I think we see it now. All right, cool.
Okay. So to install a feature, here's a practical command. Let me see if I can make that a little bigger. So enable optional feature, you give feature name. This is not highlighting, but and then online says to run it on the current machine. You can give it like VHD, which is a virtual hard disk, or you can get it WIM, which is like a Windows image, which can be turned into a virtual hard disk, or it can be turned into a ISO, a CD. Um, so this is how you enable features. There's equivalent get or disable. I can't show you live because I'm on Mac OS, so there's no equivalent there. But this is how you do that. Let me find the chat window again. And it looks like it's the company culture toward open sourcing. Like even toward the end of my tenure at on Windows Update, we were very anti-open source, but currently we're going very heavy on open source. We're open sourcing everything where we think people might contribute si significantly to PowerShell. Right now, like on PowerShell, about half of our contributions come from the community and half of them come from Microsoft people. So that I would consider a very good contribution rate. It still takes a significant amount of effort for the Microsoft people to take all those contributions. I can bring up my the like I 39% of my work is doing code reviews. And 36% is commits, but I am also a maintainer on this. So I'm one of the people that review the incoming from the community. So probably more of my commits are like actually committing pull requests than they are um, actually my own stuff. Because if you look, 20% of my work is pull requests. So that means my own pull requests. So that's an interesting question. Adding on to, do I work on anything that's currently closed source that I wish was? No, everything that I work on that's closed source is closed source only for security reasons. Like open sourcing it would make PowerShell less secure. No, there's one particular thing that could possibly be open source, and I'm like 50-50 on whether it could be um, even could be open sourced. I can't even think what it's called. Uh, I think this is, yeah, I mean, I don't think you can technically write them third party, but it's the part that handles signing for um, PowerShell files. That is not open source. That's just part of Windows. But it's called a SIP, so it's the PowerShell SIP. And all it literally does is take the certificate and the file and then injects the signature into the file. and it does that for only for PowerShell files. My team doesn't open that. Windows PowerShell is now owned by a separate team, but me and one other person reviews all the changes they make security related to those files. Anything else I work on? The only other thing is like the Windows update infrastructure, and we make every part of it that we possibly can public. Um, like we publish an MSI, and we have an exe wrapper that's needed to run in Windows Update because of some technical reasons, limitations in Windows Update. And even the exe wrappers there, the only thing that's not public is literally our test infrastructure to test inside the private version of Windows Update. And we might be able to open source that in the future once I've finished writing it. But we have to make sure we don't reveal any secrets. And as I'm writing it, there might be some secrets I accidentally put in there. So that's one thing as a big enterprise and dealing with open source is you have to make sure you don't put any secrets in your open source. And we have a tool to prevent us from doing that. It scans anything, and it literally looks at oh God, what's the term? How random any of our strings are, and looks to see if it's a secret. So it looks for keys. Passwords are harder to find because if they're a human password, it might not have enough randomness in it to actually, like if it's a really weak password, our password scanner might not detect it. But it also detects how we use it, and will detect it. Okay, and 2 more messages. So the big advantage is we get features for the big advantage. So the question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of taking community contributions for open source at a company like Microsoft? The big advantages are we get features that Microsoft would never work on. We had someone that went and worked on our equivalent of curl and added a lot of features to it, and they did things that we would have never gotten to. They did it at a very high quality, and they were doing it for their work. Their work used PowerShell. They needed something that was had certain certifications, which PowerShell has. But the disadvantage is it takes a lot of work for us to process those. If they do anything security related, it might require security reviews. Certain of our security reviews have to be done offline. Like it can't be done in open source. And there are certain coding standards, and sometimes third party or the community does these big changes to our code, trying to get it to our coding standards without understanding some parts of our code. We are legacy, but they're still functional. We don't have tests for them, and really making any changes in there are dangerous, and we really need you to not touch those. So it takes a lot of like training to train people to understand um, the impact of making changes. Um, I think that's a really good question. And like every time we get new management, this is something that we have to talk about. Although our current manager is um, this. This is my second. I know he's my third level manager, and he worked on Kubernetes. So he was the lead engineer of Kubernetes at Google. So he understands this very well, and it's not something that we really have to explain. So technically, PowerShell is part of the AKS team right now, but um, I mean, we're just separate. It's just like we're grouped with them. But um, any questions? You mentioned no, Microsoft. Once I got into Microsoft, the lack of degree really, I don't think was a hindrance at all. People at Microsoft, almost everyone judged me based on my performance, not my education. Uh, and the people at Microsoft that judged me, at Dell that judged me because of my lack of degree, were in management. Um, and really, it wasn't that they were judging my performance. It was they were judging my ability to move jobs. They were they were assuming they could work me as hard as they could without me having the ability to move to another company. My best experience working at Microsoft. Uh, my best single experience, I'm going to come back to that. My best experience overall has probably been working at PowerShell. Um, Working in the open source, pretty much everyone's open and help each other to learn because we have to help the community to learn. So helping each other learn seems about the same. And learning and growing seems great. My best single experience when I was working on WSS Windows Server Update Services, uh, we were affected by a vulnerability known as the flame. Um, and we had to fix this, and it was considered very serious. We had to fix it immediately. We were allowed to go home for 6 hours a day. Um, but the team really pulled together and we did whatever we can. The team was 3 people at the time, and we just hired a new developer. We borrowed an old developer from WSS from a new team, and I was the most experienced person on the team, and I was a tester at the time. Um, and we had to do a security review with like our centralized security team at Microsoft. And the developers really couldn't explain how some of the features worked, and I had to explain. Um, and I got really good recognition there, and we were all working together. I really like working with a good team. Um, um, so as far as the most interesting one, that's probably the most interesting. Learning how the virus, the malware worm would be a better word, how it worked was very interesting. I also had to work with the security team. By the time it got to us, the worm had deactivated itself. So the security team was piecing together a functional version of the worm so they could test our fix in their secure environment. And you can read about Flame. One of my colleagues, a dev, did a paper and presented in Germany. I don't know if it was published somewhere. Um, uh, I can try to find that, but um, it, it was really cool, like solving all those problems in a short amount of time. I actually went to a conference on DockerCon, and someone was actually talking about that specific vulnerability, and I got to speak to them. They work on something called the update framework, um, and they were talking about the vulnerabilities that they had solved in the update framework and how it related back to that particular incident. Uh, what I think I learned is I learned to like break down and analyze. Oh, let me repeat the question. Earlier, it was mentioned that you did computational research at TAMS. What experience and knowledge did you gain from the research that helps you today? I really learned to break down problems and solve them a piece at a time. Um, I've seen people that see problems and think that problems have to be solved um, like as a whole. And um, I learned a long time ago that you just have to take a step towards solving problems. You have to break it down into smaller pieces and solve problems a chunk at a time. Getting closer to your goal has to be your adequate step, because if you say the solution has to be getting to a complete solution, then most of the problems in the real world that I've experienced become unsolvable. What's something I wish I did at TAMS to recommend any incoming students? I'm really glad I did the research. It gave me um, both student mentorship and mentors from other professors, which I think really helped me a lot. Um, I had the mentor in physics and math. I think the math mentor is still there. Neil Brand um, is, I think, a professor there. Last time I asked one of my classmates, he was his boss. So the um, like I'm really glad I did that, and it allowed me, well, the stipend that I had associated allowed me to stay at TAMS when I couldn't otherwise. And um, the 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 knowledge I gained from doing research and figuring out how to solve the problems on my own, I think really helped me later on in life. Does that answer your question? No problem. That's one thing that I would really reinforce. Make the connections with the people around you at TAMS, um, and, whether it be other students or professors, and learn from each other. Microsoft's move to like Satya enforce this growth mindset. I kind of call it the learning mindset. Like you have to always be learning, and to do that, you need people around you that um, that are learning as well, that are learning and willing to teach you. Um, so make sure you set yourself up for that early. It, I think in any career that TAM students want to go into, medicine, um, software, aviation, Um, I think those areas change so rapidly that you're always going to have to learn new things. And if you don't, you'll be left behind. My favorite aspect of working around at Microsoft, uh, out of the workplaces I've worked at, it definitely has the smartest people I've ever worked with. And I love working with smart people and learning new things. Um, it I was not trained in computer science. I did go back and get my degree while I was at Microsoft, but I got an information technology degree. The Going into PowerShell so late in my life and working on a language, there is a lot to learn and a lot I'm still learning. Um, and I kind of really like being in that position.
Yeah. I think we can kind of wrap it up here. You had some really good questions.